They said she was my mother-in-law, and from the moment I married her son, she made it clear I was never going to be good enough. I was 24 when I met David Chen. He was 26, working as a software engineer in San Francisco, and I was finishing my nursing degree at UCSF. We met at a coffee shop in the Mission District. He spilled his latte on my textbook, and instead of just apologizing, he bought me a new book and asked me out. 6 months later, we were engaged. That's when I met Diana. Diana Chen was 58, a real estate agent in Palo Alto, and she had built her entire identity around being David's mother. She lived in a 4-bedroom house in one of those neighborhoods where the lawns are always perfect and everyone knows everyone's business. The first time David took me to meet her, she opened the door, looked me up and down, and said, "So you're the girl who thinks she can handle my son. Not nice to meet you? Not welcome?" Just that. I should have seen the signs then, but I was young and in love, and I thought I could win her over. I made her favorite dishes. I asked about her work. I complimented her garden. Nothing worked. At our engagement dinner, she pulled David aside and I heard her say, "You're making a mistake. She's not from a good family. What do we even know about her?" David defended me. He always did, in the moment. But he never set real boundaries. He never told his mother that her behavior was unacceptable. He just smoothed things over, asked me to be patient, promised it would get better. It didn't. We got married anyway, in a small ceremony in Napa Valley. Diana wore white. Yes, white to her son's wedding. She sat in the front row with her arms crossed the entire time. In our wedding photos, she's the only person not smiling. But I was happy. I had David. I had my nursing career. I had our little apartment in the Sunset District with the blue door and the window that looked out onto the street. I thought we could build a life together, even if his mother didn't approve. Then I got pregnant. I was 3 months along when we told Diana. We drove down to Palo Alto on a Sunday afternoon, sat in her pristine living room with the white furniture and the glass coffee table, and David said, "Mom, we're having a baby." She didn't congratulate us. She didn't smile. She looked at me with something like disgust and said, "How convenient." I didn't understand what she meant. David asked her to clarify, and she said, "Well, now she's really trapped you, hasn't she? Got pregnant to make sure you can't leave." I felt like I'd been slapped. David started arguing with her, but I couldn't hear the words anymore. I just sat there, my hand on my barely there belly, and realized that this woman was never going to accept me, and now she was going to be my child's grandmother. The pregnancy was hard. I had hyperemesis gravidarum, which is a fancy way of saying I threw up constantly for 6 months. I lost 15 pounds in my first trimester. I was hospitalized twice for dehydration. David worked long hours, so I was alone a lot, sick and scared and trying to keep my nursing shifts going because we needed my income. Diana called once during those 6 months. She asked David how he was holding up with all the drama. Our daughter was born on March 15th, 2019. We named her Sophie. She had David's dark hair and my nose, and she was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. For 2 weeks, I lived in an exhausted, beautiful bubble of new motherhood. I was learning to breastfeed. I wasn't sleeping. My body was healing, but I was happy. Then Diana decided to visit. She showed up unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon. I was 2 weeks postpartum. I hadn't showered in 3 days. I was wearing the same milk-stained shirt I'd slept in. Sophie was crying, I was crying because breastfeeding hurt and I didn't know what I was doing, and the apartment looked like a bomb had gone off. Diana walked in, took one look around and said, "This is unacceptable." I tried to explain that we were adjusting, that it was normal for things to be messy with a newborn. She didn't want to hear it. She started criticizing everything. The apartment was too small. It was too cold. I was holding Sophie wrong. I wasn't producing enough milk. I was obviously overwhelmed and incapable. Then she said, "Where's David?" He was at work. He'd gone back after 1 week of paternity leave because his company was in the middle of a product launch. We needed his salary. We needed his health insurance. Diana's face hardened. "So he's at work while you're here failing to take care of his child?" I told her I wasn't failing. I told her I was doing my best. I told her that this was what newborn life looked like. She said, "Not in a functional family, it doesn't." Then she called David. Right there in front of me, she called her son and told him he needed to come home immediately because I was having a breakdown and the baby was at risk. That wasn't true. Sophie was fine. I was exhausted and emotional, but I wasn't having a breakdown. But David heard his mother say his daughter was at risk, and he came home. When he walked in, Diana had cleaned the kitchen and was holding Sophie. She'd taken my baby out of my arms while I was in the bathroom, and now she was standing there looking competent and calm while I looked like a disaster. She told David we needed to talk. The three of us sat down, and Diana laid out what she called the situation. I was clearly not coping. The apartment was unsuitable for a baby. I had no family support since my parents had passed away years ago. David was overwhelmed trying to work and support us. The solution, she said, was obvious. You and Sophie should move back home with me temporarily, she told David. Just until you get on your feet. There's plenty of room. I can help with the baby. You can focus on work. I said no. I said we were fine in our apartment. I said we didn't need help. Diana looked at me and said, "This isn't about what you need. This is about what's best for Sophie." We argued. I tried to explain to David that his mother was manipulating him, that we didn't need to move, that I could handle this. But Diana kept bringing up the state of the apartment, my weight loss, the fact that I'd been crying. She made it sound like I was on the verge of postpartum depression or psychosis, like our daughter was in danger. And David believed her. He said we should consider it, just temporarily, just until I felt better. I felt betrayed. I told him I felt fine. I just needed time to adjust. But Diana kept pushing, and David kept wavering, and I realized with growing horror that he was actually considering choosing his mother's judgment over mine. The argument escalated. I was exhausted and hormonal, and I said things I shouldn't have said. I told David he was a mama's boy. I told him his mother was toxic. I told him he needed to choose between us. That was my mistake. Because when I gave him that ultimatum, he didn't choose me. Diana stood up and said, "I think it's clear that you're not stable right now. You're being irrational and aggressive. David, I really think you and Sophie should come stay with me until she gets help." I looked at my husband, holding our 2-week-old daughter, and I waited for him to defend me. He said, "Maybe that's best, just for a little while." I couldn't believe it. I asked him if he was seriously going to take our baby and leave. He said he wasn't leaving. He was making sure Sophie was safe. He said I needed to calm down and get some rest and we could talk about this rationally later. Diana smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. They packed a bag. David's hands were shaking, but he did it anyway. He packed clothes for himself and Sophie. He packed diapers and formula even though I was breastfeeding. He avoided looking at me the whole time. I begged him not to go. I promised I would calm down. I promised I would try harder. I promised anything if he would just stay. Diana put her hand on his shoulder and said, "David, think about what's best for your daughter." They left. David carried Sophie out of our apartment, got into his mother's Mercedes, and drove away. I stood in the doorway, 2 weeks postpartum, leaking breast milk onto my shirt, watching my family leave me. The door closed and I was alone. I called David that night. He didn't answer. I called again and again. Finally, he texted, "Mom thinks we should give you some space. We'll talk in a few days." I called Diana. She answered on the first ring, and I could hear Sophie crying in the background. "She needs to eat," I said. "I'm breastfeeding. She needs me." Diana's voice was cold. "I have formula. She'll be fine. You can't just take my baby." I didn't take anything. David made the choice to protect his daughter from an unstable environment. If you want to see Sophie, you need to get yourself together. Get some help. Maybe check yourself into a facility. I don't need a facility. I need my daughter. What you need is to understand that you've trapped my son in a situation he never wanted. You got pregnant to lock him down, and now you can't even take care of the baby properly. You've ruined his life. I was crying so hard I could barely speak. "Please, please just bring her back. I'll do anything." "Here's what you'll do," Diana said. "You'll give David some space. You'll get professional help. And when you're capable of being a proper mother, we can discuss visitation." Visitation. Like I was some kind of danger to my own child. "She's 2 weeks old," I whispered. "She needs her mother." Diana Chen said 6 words I'll never forget. "You should have thought of that earlier." Then she hung up. I sat on the floor of our apartment and I screamed. I screamed until my throat was raw. Then I called a lawyer. The lawyer told me the situation was complicated. David hadn't technically kidnapped Sophie because he was her father. Diana had no legal rights, but she wasn't the one who'd taken Sophie, David was. If I wanted Sophie back, I'd need to file for emergency custody, which would mean going to court and proving that David had removed our daughter from my care without justification. How long will that take? I asked. Weeks, maybe months. And you'll need to be able to demonstrate that you're stable and capable. If he's claiming you were having a mental health crisis, you'll need documentation to counter that. I didn't have weeks. My breasts were engorged and painful. My daughter was drinking formula when she should have been nursing. Every hour that passed felt like something being ripped away from me. I drove to Palo Alto. It was 10 p.m. and raining. I stood outside Diana's house and I could see lights on upstairs. I rang the doorbell. Diana answered. She was in a silk robe holding a glass of wine. "You need to leave my property," she said. "I want my daughter." "David's asleep. Sophie's asleep. You're being disruptive." "She's my baby." Diana looked at me like I was pathetic. "You're standing in the rain at my house in the middle of the night. This is exactly the kind of behavior that proves you're not fit to parent. Please." I was begging now. "Please, I just want to hold her. Just let me see her." "No. David will call you when he's ready. Until then, you need to leave, or I'm calling the police." I stood there in the rain, looking up at the window where my daughter was sleeping, and I realized something. Diana was never going to let me have Sophie back, and David wasn't going to stand up to her. I drove back to San Francisco with windshield wipers beating against the rain and my milk letting down and my entire body aching for my baby. The apartment was so quiet. I had $4,200 in my personal checking account. I had my nursing license. I had my car. That was it. I called my best friend, Maria. She came over at midnight and found me sitting in Sophie's nursery, holding a onesie and sobbing. "They took her," I told her. "His mother took my baby and he let her." Maria held me while I cried. Then she said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to fight." The next morning, I filed for emergency custody. I documented everything: the text messages from David, the phone call with Diana, the fact that I was breastfeeding and Sophie needed me. My lawyer submitted everything to the court. It took 3 days to get a hearing. 3 days where I didn't see my daughter. 3 days where I pumped breast milk every 3 hours and poured it down the drain because Sophie wasn't there to drink it. The hearing was brutal. David showed up with Diana and a lawyer she'd hired. They painted me as unstable. They said I'd been unable to cope with motherhood. They said the apartment was filthy and I'd been neglecting myself and Sophie. They said I'd become aggressive and given David an ultimatum. My lawyer countered with medical records showing I'd been taking Sophie to all her checkups, that she was healthy and gaining weight, that I'd been managing hyperemesis gravidarum throughout my pregnancy and was now dealing with normal postpartum adjustment. She pointed out that I was breastfeeding, which meant Sophie needed to be with me. The judge looked tired. He said that this appeared to be a family dispute rather than a safety issue, and that David was Sophie's father and had the right to care for her. He ordered David to return Sophie to me within 24 hours and scheduled a follow-up hearing for custody arrangements. I won. Legally, I won. But when David brought Sophie back, something had broken. He handed her to me without meeting my eyes. She smelled different, like Diana's laundry detergent instead of like herself. She'd lost weight because the formula hadn't agreed with her. David said, "My lawyer will be in touch about custody." That's when I understood. He wasn't coming back. He'd chosen his mother over me, and now we were going to be one of those families. Split custody, weekends and holidays. My daughter growing up in 2 homes because her father couldn't stand up to his mother. I said, "You really chose her over us." He finally looked at me. She was just trying to help. She called me unstable. She took our daughter. She told me I'd trapped you. You put me in an impossible position. I was holding Sophie, breathing in her baby smell even though it was mixed with Diana's detergent. "No, David, your mother put you in an impossible position, and you chose her." He left. The divorce papers came 2 weeks later. Diana had won. For the next 6 months, I lived in a fog. I had Sophie most of the time because I was breastfeeding, but David had her every Sunday. Every Sunday, he picked her up and took her to Palo Alto, to his mother's house, and I knew Diana was there playing grandmother and telling David what a better life Sophie would have without me. I was surviving, not living. I worked night shifts at the hospital because they paid more. I slept when Sophie slept. I ate frozen burritos and cried in my car during my breaks. My entire world had shrunk down to this. Keep Sophie safe, keep working, keep going. Then one night, I was working in the ER and a woman came in. She was 45, homeless, with pneumonia. While I was checking her vitals, she said, "You're that nurse who's always kind." I didn't know what she meant. I was just doing my job. She said, "Most people look at me like I'm invisible. You always look me in the eye. You treat me like I'm human." Something about that broke me open. I went to the bathroom on my break and I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked exhausted, defeated, like I'd given up on everything except survival. And I thought, is this who I want Sophie to see when she looks at her mother? That night, I made a decision. I couldn't control David. I couldn't control Diana, but I could control my own life. I started small. I found a therapist who specialized in postpartum issues and divorce. I joined a single mother's support group at the hospital. I started going to the gym at 5 a.m. before Sophie woke up because movement helped my anxiety. Then I looked at my career. I'd been a floor nurse for 2 years, working nights, barely making $68,000 a year in one of the most expensive cities in America. I couldn't afford a better apartment. I couldn't afford childcare. I couldn't build the life I wanted for Sophie this way. So I went back to school. I enrolled in an online nurse practitioner program. It meant working full-time, taking care of Sophie full-time on my days with her, and studying whenever she slept. It meant living on 4 hours of sleep a night. It meant eating ramen and shopping at Goodwill and saying no to anything that cost money. But I did it. For 2 years, I worked and studied and raised my daughter. David continued taking her on Sundays. Diana continued making comments about my small apartment and my car that was always breaking down, and wasn't it sad that Sophie didn't have a stable home life? I didn't argue. I just smiled and kept working. When Sophie was 2.5, I passed my boards and became a family nurse practitioner. My salary nearly doubled. I went from $68,000 to $115,000. I moved us out of the Sunset District apartment with the blue door. We got a 2-bedroom in Noe Valley with a little yard. I bought Sophie a swing set. When David came to pick her up the first Sunday in our new place, he looked around and said, "This is nice." I said, "We're doing fine." By the time Sophie was 3, I'd paid off my student loans from nursing school. I had money and savings for the first time in my life. I could afford to take Sophie to the Children's Museum and the zoo. I could buy her new clothes instead of secondhand. Diana still made comments. At pickup, she'd say things like, "Oh, you're working so much. It must be hard on Sophie not having you around." Or, "David says you have her in daycare full-time now. That's such a shame." I didn't engage. I just kept building our life. When Sophie was 4, the hospital where I worked offered me a position managing their urgent care clinic. It came with a salary of $135,000 and better hours. I took it. I bought us a house. Not a big house, just a 3-bedroom Craftsman in the East Bay that needed work, but it was ours. Sophie had her own room. I had a home office. We had a garden where we planted tomatoes and sunflowers. The first night in our house, Sophie ran through the rooms laughing, and I stood in the kitchen and I cried. Not sad tears, grateful tears. We'd made it. David saw the house when he picked Sophie up the next Sunday. He didn't say anything, but I saw him take it in, the mortgage I was paying, the stability I'd built, the life I'd created for our daughter without him. Diana wasn't there that day, but the next time she was, she walked through and said, "Well, this is quite the upgrade. You must be doing well at work." I said, "We're happy here." She looked at me with something I'd never seen before. It might have been respect, or maybe just surprise that I'd survived. By the time Sophie was 5, I'd been promoted again. I was the director of 3 urgent care clinics, making $160,000 a year. I'd renovated the house, I'd paid off my car, I had a retirement fund. More importantly, Sophie was thriving. She was in kindergarten at a good public school. She had friends. She loved ballet and soccer and reading. She was happy. I'd been so focused on building our life that I almost didn't notice when David started pulling back. The Sunday pickups became every other Sunday, then once a month. He'd moved in with Diana after our divorce, and apparently living with your mother at 32 wasn't conducive to dating. He was lonely. He was stuck. I didn't gloat. I didn't say, "I told you so." I just kept living. Then Sophie turned 6, and everything changed. It was a Tuesday evening. Sophie was at after-school care, and I was finishing up paperwork at the clinic when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered, and a woman's voice said, "Is this Rachel Morrison?" I confirmed it was. "This is Karen from Brookside Assisted Living in Palo Alto. I'm calling about Diana Chen. You're listed as an emergency contact." My stomach dropped. "I'm not her emergency contact. Her son David is. We've been trying to reach David all day. He's not answering. You're listed as the secondary contact." I felt cold. What happened? "Mrs. Chen had a stroke this morning. She's at Stanford Hospital. She's stable, but it was significant. We need someone to come discuss her care needs." I sat there holding the phone, and 1,000 thoughts went through my head. This woman had tried to destroy me. She'd taken my baby. She'd called me a trap. She'd made my life hell for years. And she'd listed me as her emergency contact. I called David. No answer. I texted him. Nothing. I picked up Sophie from after-school care, fed her dinner, and called my neighbor who sometimes babysat. She came over, and I drove to Stanford Hospital. Diana was in ICU. The stroke had affected her left side. She couldn't speak clearly. When she saw me walk in, her eyes widened, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. I sat down next to her bed. I didn't touch her hand. I just sat there. She tried to talk, but the words came out slurred. I could make out David and sorry. I said, "He's not answering his phone." She closed her eyes. A tear ran down her face. I stayed for an hour. I talked to her doctors. I signed the paperwork they needed signed. I made sure she had what she needed. Then I left. I didn't call David again. I figured he'd check his phone eventually. He did. At 11 p.m., he called me back, panicked. The hospital called. "My mom had a stroke. Why didn't you tell me?" I said. I tried calling and texting. "You didn't answer." I was at work. My phone was on silent. "Why were they calling you?" Apparently, I'm her emergency contact. Silence. Then, "That doesn't make sense. Karen from Brookside said you weren't answering, so they called me." More silence. "You went to the hospital?" "Someone had to." He exhaled. "Thank you. I'm heading there now." "David, she's stable. You should get some sleep and go in the morning." "She's my mother." "I know." The next few weeks were chaos. Diana survived the stroke, but she needed extensive rehab. She couldn't live alone anymore. She couldn't work. David had to take time off to figure out her care situation. He called me one night. Exhausted. "I don't know what to do. She needs full-time care. Assisted living is $8,000 a month and insurance won't cover it. I can't afford that." I didn't say anything. He said, "I might have to move her in with me permanently, hire a nurse." "You're still living with her?" "I never moved out." I thought about that. David was 32 years old, still living in his mother's house, stuck in the life she'd designed for him. And now she needed him to take care of her. He said, "I know I have no right to ask this, but could you help me find a good in-home care nurse? You're in healthcare. You know people." I thought about saying no. I thought about all the ways Diana had hurt me, the things she'd said, the fact that she'd tried to take my daughter. But I also thought about Sophie and about the kind of person I wanted to be. I said, "I'll send you some names." "Thank you." "Rachel, I'm sorry for everything. You should tell that to your mother, not me." 3 months later, Diana was living in a skilled nursing facility. David was visiting her every day, managing her care, and slowly realizing what it meant to be trapped. Meanwhile, I got another promotion. I was overseeing all urgent care operations for a network of 10 clinics, $195,000 a year. I was 30 years old, a single mother, and I was running a healthcare department. Sophie was in first grade. She could read chapter books. She loved science. She wanted to be a doctor when she grew up. Life was good. Then one Sunday, David brought Sophie home and lingered at the door. "Can we talk?" he asked. I let him in. Sophie ran to her room to play, and David sat on my couch, looking around at the life I'd built. "You've done really well," he said. "We've been lucky." "It's not luck. You worked for this." "I can see that." I waited. He said, "My mom wants to see you." "Why?" "She wants to apologize." I felt something cold settle in my chest. I don't need her apology. She's been talking about it a lot. The stroke gave her some clarity. She wants to make things right before. He trailed off. Before she dies? She's not dying, but she's not getting better either, and I think she has regrets. I thought about Diana lying in that hospital bed, fear in her eyes. I thought about the woman who'd called me a trap, who'd taken my baby, who'd tried to destroy my life, and I thought about the fact that I'd survived anyway. I said, "I don't want to see her." David looked surprised. "Really? Really? She's an old woman now, Rachel. She's had a stroke. She can barely move half her body. Don't you think?" "Don't I think what? That I should forgive her because she's suffered? That I owe her comfort because she's finally realized what she did was wrong? It would mean a lot to her." "I'm sure it would. But this isn't about her anymore, David. It hasn't been for a long time." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I let her control my life. I see that now. I should have stood up for you. I should have protected our family. I didn't, and I'm sorry. I appreciate that." "Is there any chance he stopped himself?" "Any chance of what?" "Never mind. You've moved on." "I can see that." I had moved on. Not to another relationship. I hadn't dated anyone since the divorce. I didn't need to. I had Sophie. I had my career. I had my house and my garden and my quiet, peaceful life. I'd built something Diana couldn't take from me. David stood to leave. At the door, he said, "She really does want to make amends." I said, "Then she should focus on making amends with you. You're the one who's still there." He flinched a little at that. "That's fair." After he left, I sat in my living room listening to Sophie sing to herself in her room. I thought about forgiveness and what it means and whether I owed it to anyone. I didn't think I did. Forgiveness isn't something you owe people who hurt you. It's not a debt to be paid or a prize they win for finally feeling sorry. Forgiveness is something you give yourself when you're ready to let go of the weight. I'd let go of the weight years ago. I'd let go when I went back to school, when I took the promotion, when I bought this house. I'd let go every time I chose to build something instead of dwelling on what had been taken from me. I didn't need to sit in a nursing facility and tell Diana Chen that I forgave her. She didn't need my absolution to find peace, and I didn't need to give it to find mine. I already had peace. A week later, David called again. "My mother passed away yesterday." I sat down. "I'm sorry." "She asked about you. At the end, she wanted to know if you'd come." "I'm sorry I didn't." "No, you. You were right not to. She spent her whole life controlling people and then wondered why she died with only me there. That's not your fault." We were quiet for a moment. He said, "I'm moving to Portland. Fresh start. I got a job offer up there. I know it means less time with Sophie, but I think I need to get out of the Bay Area. Too many memories." "I understand. I'll still see her. Every other month, I'll fly down. Or she can come up in summers when she's older. We'll figure it out." "Okay." "Rachel?" "Yeah? You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I threw it away because I couldn't stand up to my mother. I just wanted you to know that I know that." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said, "I hope Portland is good for you." He moved 2 months later. Sophie was sad but resilient. She video called him every week. He flew down once a month like he promised. And I kept building. By the time Sophie was 8, I was the chief operating officer of a healthcare company. I made $240,000 a year. I'd renovated the whole house. I'd started a college fund for Sophie that was already at $50,000. I'd paid off the mortgage. More than that, I was happy. I woke up every morning grateful for my life. I had work that mattered. I had a daughter who was smart and kind and confident. I had friends. I had stability. I had everything Diana thought I'd never have. Not because I'd proven her wrong, I'd stopped caring about her opinion years ago, but because I'd proven to myself that I was stronger than the worst thing that ever happened to me. Sophie will be 9 next month. Sometimes she asks about her grandmother, the one she barely remembers. I tell her the truth, that Grandma Diana loved her very much, but that she made some mistakes that hurt people. Sophie asks if I miss her. I say, I miss who she could have been, but I don't miss who she was. That's honest. And I think honesty is the best thing I can give my daughter. Last week, I got an offer to join the board of a nonprofit that provides healthcare to underserved communities. It's volunteer work, no pay, but it's the kind of thing I would have dreamed about doing when I was 24 and drowning in medical debt and heartbreak. I said yes, because I can. Because I have the time and the resources and the stability to give back. Because I'm free. That's what Diana never understood. She thought keeping me small would make her powerful. She thought if she could destroy me, she'd win. But I didn't need to destroy her back to win. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need her apology. I just needed to survive long enough to build something beautiful from the ruins she left behind. And I did. So when people ask me if I forgive Diana Chen, I tell them the truth. I don't forgive her, and I don't hate her. She's just someone who was in my life for a while. Someone who hurt me badly. Someone who I survived. And surviving her was the best thing I ever did for myself. Because it taught me that I don't need to be loved by everyone. I don't need to be accepted by people who can't see my worth. I don't need closure from people who never gave me respect. I just need to keep showing up for myself and my daughter. And that's exactly what I do. Every single day. I wake up at 6 a.m. I make Sophie breakfast. I drive her to school. I go to work. I come home. I help with homework. I read her stories. I tuck her in. And somewhere in there, I live a life that's mine. Not defined by Diana's rejection. Not limited by David's weakness. Just mine. The other day, Sophie asked me, Mommy, are we rich? I said, we're comfortable. Why? Because Daddy lives in a small apartment and we have this whole house. I thought about how to answer that. Then I said, we have what we have because we worked hard and we made good choices. And because we never gave up, even when things were really hard. When were things hard? She doesn't remember. She was too young. And I'm glad. I said, a long time ago. But we got through it. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her book. And I sat there thinking about that Rachel. The one who stood in the rain outside Diana's house begging to see her baby. The one who pumped milk and cried in her car. The one who thought she'd never be happy again. I wish I could go back and tell her, you're going to make it. Not just survive, thrive. You're going to build something so much better than what you lost. But I can't go back. So instead, I'll keep going forward. I'll keep showing Sophie what it looks like to be strong without being bitter, to set boundaries without being cruel, to succeed without needing revenge. I'll keep building this life, this beautiful, hard one, nobody can take it from me life. And if somewhere, in whatever comes after this, Diana Chen is watching, I hope she sees what I became despite her. Not because of her, despite her. I hope she sees that she didn't break me. She just taught me how strong I could be. And honestly, that's the best revenge I could have asked for. Living well, living free, living without her. That's my victory, and it's enough.